I wanted to be here because I thought it was important for me personally to be here. First of all, to thank you for everything that you do every day. It has been a privilege to be working with you. I haven't gotten to meet all of you or been to all of your workplaces. I've been kind of circulating around slowly. I'll eventually get to where you are, but I wanted to be here and say hello to you and help kick this off. I also want to recognize a few people that are here that have been crucial in this whole process that we've started about trying to create a more specifically ethical culture, and those are people like our Inspector General that we appointed, Naila Bird, who's here. Also, some of the county council members who have helped write and design and pass our ethics ordinance, which we're proud of. Those are people like Mike Gallagher and Dave Greenspan and Yvonne Conwell and Pernell Jones, and Jack Schron is here. I don't know if I missed any other council people. Councilman Miller is here. I don't think we have a quorum, so I think we're okay with that. But they spent a lot of time and effort in doing it. Now, why is it important that we do this? Because, look, it is not a secret, far from it, that the county has been under a lot of scrutiny, and that there were people in certain positions within the county who let everybody else down. And they and you've heard me say this before when I addressed workers just before I was sworn in, but they didn't just let down the taxpayers or their constituents, but they also let down the people that worked with them. Because the county is overwhelmingly made up of ethical, honest, and hardworking individuals whose reputation was hurt by people that were higher profile but didn't conform to what our ethical expectations are. So what do you do when you take over a system like that, or you're part of a system like that? How do you change that so that when you tell people what you do for a living, you don't have to apologize or explain it? That you clearly define, first of all, what are your ethical standards? And to me, ethics come from, the vast majority of us would agree on what all ethical standards should be because it's how we behave anyway. But you have to have a process where that is very clearly defined. Because the more uncertainty it is, the more chance that there might be disagreements about how those are interpreted or how they're enforced. So you have to have, it's like there's an old saying in the law actually, that good fences make for good neighbors. If there's a clear division between property or between individuals or among individuals, then it's easier to know how to relate with one another. So it's important for us to have clearly defined expectations. So we've started that because we have a very comprehensive ethics ordinance which we spent a lot of time passing, and we may refine it as time goes on, but it's definitely a good foundation. So we've defined it, and we've also established very high ethical standards. So we wanted to have them clearly defined. We wanted them to be among the strictest in the state. Secondly, we wanted to make sure that we have some kind of independent enforcement of that, which is why we immediately did a couple different things. One is we started really building a relationship with agencies, whether they be law enforcement or whether they be the Ohio Ethics Commission, outside of county government, so they can help us monitor our own behavior. But then we also have our own independent inspector general within county government for the first time, so that there is a place that you can go to where you can get guidance on ethical issues, where there can be enforcement of ethical issues, and there can be an assurance to the public that we're self-policing, so that the system doesn't have to fall apart and somebody from the outside has to come in and try to put it back together again. We don't want to go through that again. So that's what this is, the beginning of the process. And the people that have been here and have been, I was a county employee for about 5 years, then I left the county, and now I'm back again. There's many of you that have been here for a couple decades. I just want you to know, whether you've been here a couple decades or whether you're a new employee, I just want you to know that you've been through a lot in terms of the uncertainty and the bad publicity because of the actions of a few people, but it's this kind of process day in, day out that's going to fix that. And I think it will fix it eventually. Now, it isn't all about employees, by the way. I just want you to know that too. It's anybody that we do business with. So part of what I wanted to let you know today is that ethics training and a strong ethical policy isn't just something, it's not just a set of rules that you have to make sure that you stay on the right side of. It's also a protection for the employee. Because you need to know when you interact with another employee or with somebody outside the county, you need to be able to say, hey, I know exactly what the rules are, and here's what they are, and here's how I'm in compliance with them. And we're going to have the same kinds of expectations for people that we work with outside the county. So on approximately around June 30th, we're going to have the county's first ethics training for vendors. So I just want you to know we're not just stopping with employees, we're also expecting that if somebody is contracting with Cuyahoga County, they're going to have to sign off on their own code of ethics or our own code of ethics, and then they're going to have to, in order to be eligible to even contract with the county, they're going to have to go through the same kind of training that you're going through. We're in a hurry to try to get these things done. That's the public's expectation. It doesn't mean it's going to be done perfectly, and there's going to be ways that we can improve upon it. And if you see things in this training as things go on, I want you to feel free to let us know if there are things that you think we're leaving out or things that we could improve on, because this is the first one that we've done in this kind of a setting. So let us know. You can either let my office know directly, or you can let Elise Hara and the folks from HR know. And you can also do that anonymously. If you think that there are ways that we can improve this system that we're going to have that's going to encourage and reward ethical behavior, I hope you'll feel free to do that. Now, it's my privilege at this time. As I said before, we are trying to include outside agencies to validate and bring their expertise. And so we're very happy that we have a couple folks from the Ohio Ethics Commission who are here. Susan Willicke, who is here. She's the Education and Communications Administrator. And also Paul Nick, who is the new head of the Ohio Ethics Commission for the entire state of Ohio. He just officially took over in that capacity, although he's been there for a number of years. So without any further ado, I want to turn it over to them to work their magic. Thank you for coming here, and thanks for listening to me. Folks?
This is all about politics. We're just friends, that's all. I'm not influenced by free gifts. These are some of the excuses that I've heard over the years, in my 16 years at the Ohio Ethics Commission, investigating and sometimes prosecuting public officials and employees for ethical misconduct. But the truth of the matter, as the county executive mentioned, is that few people wake up in the morning and say to themselves, you know what, I'm going to commit a crime. In fact, I submit to you that the vast majority of public officials and employees in Cuyahoga County and elsewhere throughout the state do their jobs ethically and with passion. So that begs the question then, why do people steal? Why do people cheat? Why do people accept bribes? What causes someone to compromise their personal integrity in that manner? What makes a good public servant go bad? Experts who have studied this question, such as Donald Cressy, have determined that there are three factors that must be present in order for an employee, public or private, to commit a fraud against their employer. One is they must have a motive or a need, such as an unexpected bill or an unmet financial desire. Second, there must be a rationalization or a justification that they go through to steal, such as the tone from the top. And third, they must have the opportunity to commit the act, such as weak internal controls. Ethics policies, such as the one that Cuyahoga County has passed here, cannot eliminate financial needs or desires. That's the responsibility of the individual. But what they can do is help remove the other parts of this fraud triangle. First, by setting the right tone at the top, that county leadership will act at all times in the best interests of the taxpayers that they serve. And secondly, that the ethics policies, through transparency, accountability, and whistleblower protections, will reduce the opportunity to commit offenses against the taxpayers. Susan Wilkie will walk you through many of the ethics laws that apply to all public officials and employees across the state and those who do business with all public employees across the state. But getting back to the first part of the fraud triangle about opportunity or needs. As public servants, I think we should always remember that we are the face of government. People judge government by those they interact with, who they meet with, and how they are treated. Each of you individually has the ability, and I submit to you the obligation, to change the image of Cuyahoga County. Beware of false friends. They will lead you astray and betray you. But instead, each day ask yourself, how can I better serve the taxpayers of Cuyahoga County? And as you go about your work, be mindful of potential conflicts of interest, and remember the two main principles of ethical behavior. Number one, disclose. Number two, abstain. But at the end of the day, take pride in your work. And more importantly, earn the right to be proud. You guys deserve this. Susan Wilkie is going to talk to you now about the state ethics law. It's very difficult in a short period of time to give you a full exposition of what all the rules and restrictions are that apply into here. Your code speaks to them. Our website speaks to them. But more importantly, if you ever have any questions, anybody individually, give us a call. We're here to help you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Happy Monday. Who had a good weekend? Oh, good. That's nice to see. You know, I have to tell you, I'm Susan Wilkie, just in case I forget. There's me. Okay. I have to tell you, coming to Cleveland's a little bit like coming home to me. I love Cleveland. My father grew up in, nowadays, they call it Tremont. Yes, is this correct? Now, see, my dad, though, it's the South Side. That's what he calls the South Side. So I took him there. My dad was born in 1925 to immigrant folks came to this city. And I took him to Tremont not long ago so he could see his old neighborhood. And he kept saying, what are these little shops and cafes and what's all this? So I have to tell you, Cleveland really shows well to people who are born and raised here. My dad was really proud to say this is where I grew up. So thanks for having us up today. I love coming to Cleveland. But having said all that, you're probably feeling like, okay, it was a good day. But now you're going to quote to us from some ethics law, right? I double dog dare you, Susan, to make this area of the law interesting, right? You know, I have found that people are sometimes surprised how interested they find themselves in the study of ethics. How many of you would classify yourself as someone who engages in the age-old sport of people watching? Do you have any people watchers in the room with me today? Oh, yeah, me too, me too. If you, like I do, find people fascinating, you might just be surprised in how interested you find yourself in the study of ethics, because when you come right down to it, the study of ethics is a study of what? People. It's us. Why do we do the things that we do? What are the things that motivate us? What are those factors that guide our decision-making processes, both as people and certainly as public servants as well? Now, just in case you don't know this, the ethics law has been around since the early 70s. Many states were thinking of introducing or actually beginning to introduce ethics laws in the early 70s. I'll bet you can't guess what scandal might have prompted ethics laws in the early 70s in the US, can you? Okay, you know, not every group knows that anymore. If you talk to undergraduate students at universities, they're not so sure what the early 70s were all about, yeah. But yeah, Watergate wasn't the beginning or the end of ethical or unethical behavior. As long as human beings are involved in government, we're gonna see both very ethical and sometimes less ethical behavior. What it was the beginning, though, was this idea of actually putting into statute these boundaries, these parameters, if you will, that say, okay, for those of us in public service, how do we know what the right course of action is? How do we know what we can or we can't do? And really, when we're talking about public servants, we're talking about all of us, all across the state. I think sometimes there's a misperception that there are different ethics laws for different people. Well, there's probably one for state employees and one for local governments. And there's probably one for elected office holders and one for non-elected. The ethics law is the same for all of us. It's what we like to call a uniform standard of conduct. It applies to all of us equally. Now, if you're wondering, you know, yeah, it's hired, elected, appointed, full-time, part-time, but you know, Mr. Fitzgerald also referenced the fact that there are folks in this state, lots of them, many of which, most of which, are not public servants that are subject to some provision of the ethics law. All your vendors, folks who are seeking to do business with Cuyahoga County, those whom you all regulate. Let's say that you work in one of those offices you actually regulate. You know, you do inspections, you review permits, licenses, applications, plans, et cetera, et cetera. And those with a specific interest, somebody who's going to be impacted, definitely, directly, by something your office is going to do, all of these folks are subject to certain provision of the ethics law as well. So when we talk about this ethics law, before I jump into all right, what's in the law, I like to tackle for just a minute here the why of this ethics law. I once had someone ask me, actually it was just in January, I get this question a lot right after the holiday season, that I had someone raise their hand in a class, and she said, Susan, so let me get this straight. What you're telling me the ethics law is all about, what you guys at the Ethics Commission, to use her words, not mine, are all hung up on, is how many cookies we ate this Christmas from our vendors. Really? That's what you're spending our state time and dollars on? And I was able to say pretty honestly, no, that's not what the ethics law is all about. My general rule of thumb when it comes to things like chocolate is that it's only dangerous when not shared with me. Other than this, no, I wouldn't say the Ethics Commission, Paul doesn't have all the investigators searching through your trash cans to see if you ate some popcorn this holiday season. That's really not the idea here of the ethics law. When you think of the ethics law, forgive me, I'm a visual learner, so somehow I arrogantly assume everybody else must be as well. When you think of the ethics law, I want you to picture, if you will, for a minute, a big umbrella covering this room. And this umbrella is, in fact, the ethics law. And in front of you, you each have two hats that you wear under the ethics law. Now, this hat is your public servant hat. And this is the hat that we probably think of the most often when we think, oh, because of the ethics law, because I'm a public servant, I can't do some things, right? And they're always thou shalt not, and you can't do this, and you can't take this, and you can't do that. And many of us accept that and just know it. Some of you may live this in your home like I do. My husband works for Chase Bank, before that was Bank One, and very common, not so much the last few years with the economy, but back in the day, the country clubs and the take this client golfing and go to, right? We know that that occurs in the private sector, and in most cases, normal, perfectly normal, legitimate, legal, et cetera, et cetera. We get that. Under this ethics law, because we chose to pick up this public servant hat, we understand some of that is just not going to be our reality, that it should not be our reality. We get that. We know that. But I think sometimes, because that may be the only hat that's drummed into our head that we can't do this, we forget about this other hat that sits in front of us. You know what I like to call it? I like to call it your fellow taxpayer hat. Yes, under the ethics law, with your public servant hat on, there are some restrictions on you. No question about it. But don't we sometimes forget that under this ethics law, when you wear your fellow taxpayer hat, don't you also have some rights under the ethics law? Don't you have the right to expect that government, every government, state, county, city, township, village, don't you have the right to expect that the governments that you live under, that you pay taxes to, that they will operate in a certain way? I think you have the right. I think I have that right. Let's say that you live in Anytown, Ohio. That's the name of the town you call home, right? And the city council of Anytown, Ohio has to choose a company to replace the roof on Anytown City Hall because there was some wind damage this spring. Don't you, as a taxpayer, have the right to expect that your city council will base that decision on which roofing company to hire based on things like price, quality of work, customer satisfaction, timeline turnaround, versus that city council making that decision primarily on the fact that the president of any town city council happens to own a roofing company? Don't you have the right, don't you under the ethics law as a taxpayer have the right to expect that government ought to represent us? That's the power of the ethics law. That's really where we see this law protecting us in ways we may not even think about. Now, when people ask me sometimes, when you think of the ethics law, Susan, what's the one word that comes to your mind? And I think people are waiting for like some really headline-grabbing, really tantalizing word like corruption or dirty politics or bribery. And the truth is, I do have a word that I think about when I think about the ethics law. But here's the word. It's the word bias. I think of the word bias when I think, why is this ethics law such a good thing? Now, mind you, I didn't say there that bias cannot ever exist. I once had someone approach me after a speech like this one, and he told me he was actually slightly offended by my speech, and I'm glad he came to talk to me instead of leaving upset. But he said what bothered him was that he felt I had implied in my speech that he or some of his colleagues could be biased individuals. So I want to be really clear. That was very clumsy of me that I left that impression in the audience. I want to be really clear about this and not make that mistake again. I would never come here and suggest that some of you are biased. Instead, I'll tell you outright that all of you are biased. But so am I. So is every human being who has ever walked the planet. Bias is part of the human condition. Now, some of you are looking at me like I'm crazy here, right? You think I'm accusing you of being bad people or something? Just out of curiosity, if I have to take a quick poll of the room here, how many moms and dads do I have in the room with me? Could you raise your hand for me? All right, of all of you who said yes, how many of you have the cutest, brightest, best kids in the whole world? Who has the best kids in the whole world? Not that we're biased, right? See, here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with being biased. The ethics law never said we can't be biased. That's like saying, now that you're a public servant, you can't be human. It's not what the ethics law says. What the ethics law is essentially telling us is, yes, we're biased. Don't deny it. Don't try to bury it. Instead, as Paul said, disclose it. Embrace it. Yes, I'm biased in this scenario when it comes to my own life, my family, the people I love, maybe even my money, my property value, my investments, my tax rate, maybe that nonprofit that I'm on the board of directors for. Naturally, I'm biased about those things. The ethics law didn't say we can't be biased or that we have to quit our job if those biases come to light at our job. What the ethics law is telling us is we should not ever act on those biases in our public careers. That's really the crux of this whole thing. We talk about conflicts of interest. Now, quick hypothetical. Let's pretend for a minute that I work for, about a year ago, I spoke to the Ohio Veterans Home in Sandusky, Ohio. If you're not familiar with it, it's essentially a hospital facility for veterans all across the state of Ohio. And I was speaking to their staff that day, and I said, let's pretend for a minute that I work for the Ohio Veterans Home. And every day at my desk, I get a stack of files, and each file represents a veteran from somewhere in the state of Ohio, and he or she is seeking some sort of access to medical care, physical therapy or surgery, et cetera, et cetera. And I go through this stack every day, and I make decisions, approved, denied, need more information, not eligible, try again next year, et cetera. And one day, I'm at this hypothetical job, and I open one of these hypothetical files, and I come across a pretty familiar name. Now, some of you might have already picked up on the fact that I have an older dad. He was born, as I mentioned, in Cleveland in 1925. He turned 86 years old in February, and he served with honor during World War II. Fought in New Guinea, part of the second wave of the invasion of the Philippines, 2 Purple Hearts, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Silver Star. You've probably picked up on the fact I'm just slightly biased about my 86-year-old dad, right? Okay, so here I am back at my hypothetical job. I open this file and I say, whoa, this is my dad's application. What do I do? What do I do? Because now there's 2 halves of my brain in opposition to each other, right? Because this half of my brain is saying, now Susan, you have a legal and a moral obligation to the citizens of the state of Ohio to make an objective decision based on the established criteria which protects the veterans who apply for these benefits as well as all the citizens that fund the programs in the first place, right? Yeah. What's the other half of my brain saying? This is my daddy we're talking about, right? This is not some anonymous veteran whom I will never meet or know. This is my father, and I'm telling you hands down which side of my brain wants to win that argument. 2 questions here. First of all, does it make me inherently evil that I'm biased in that scenario? Now, what's it make you? Human. Welcome to the human race. If you would find it difficult to be completely objective in scenarios that impact some of these groups, yourself and your family and your outside business associates, etc. But the second thing then is this. If it doesn't make me a bad person that I am biased in this scenario, but I still do work at this hypothetical agency, does that then make my father ineligible to apply for or to receive those benefits? No. But what does it mean to protect the citizens of the state of Ohio from biased government decision making? What is my obligation in that hypothetical scenario? Yeah. And when we say pass on or step back or abstain, do be aware I don't mean that we assign it to a subordinate or even that I give it to a peer. We're going to go right back to my boss and say, hey boss, this one needs to be assigned to someone who has no idea who it is, and I will stay completely 100% out of it. I think sometimes in Ohio, because of some of the high-profile situations we've seen, here in the county, but across the state as well, sometimes I think we have this vision that the ethics law is only in action. It's only protecting us when someone's being charged with a crime, when there's headlines in the paper talking about the wrongdoing that someone did. And the truth is, the ethics law is protecting us In those quiet moments in offices all over the state, just like yours, when one decent, hardworking public servant says, hey boss, I can't work on this case. This impacts my father's application. This impacts my sister's case at the Department of Job and Family Service. Oh, this building inspection has to be done? Yeah, that's my son's business. That plan that we have to review, I work for him part-time in my private life. I better step away. You know, those moments don't make headlines, do they? But those really are the moments when Ohioans as a whole, and certainly in this case, folks who call Cuyahoga County home or where they work, those are the moments when they really are protected by the ethics law and by people who understand what this ethics law really is all about. So when you think about, in more practical terms, this conflict of interest, I told you I'm a visual learner, so we got these two roads going this way, and that's because there's these two provisions I want to talk about first, 10203 D and E. Now, when you read these two little sections of the code here, you're going to think, boy, they look an awful lot alike, don't they? Because this first one says, you know, I can't use my influence or my authority to secure something of value. And the very next one says, I can't solicit or accept something of value. So they're the same thing, right? Here's how I like to picture these two somethings of value, if you will. I like to think of them as tangible and intangible things of value, right? Now, not in the way, any lawyers in the room, not in the way lawyers use the word tangible. I'm talking the way we learned in the first grade what tangible is. You can touch it, feel it, consume it, imbibe it, enjoy it, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got these tangible and these, if you'll give me some leeway here, intangible things of value. My guess is, for many of us, when we think of public servants who have gotten themselves into some bad situations by getting, securing, accepting things of value, my guess is we go first to that second bullet point, 10203E, that talks about soliciting or accepting. I like to think of those as those tangible things of value, those gifts, if you will. Right? This is the, you know, someone gave me a ticket to this ball game, or someone offered to take me to this Broadway show, or they're going to do, you know, this to my home, or they're going to give me this expensive thing. A lot of us think of those things first. Understandably, we've seen those stories in the papers, again, yes, here in the county, but certainly across the state as well. I will say this, though. For many of us in public service, if that's all we heard, if that's the only message that were brought to us, many of us are going to unconsciously or subconsciously mentally dismiss the ethics law as having much relevance to us, right? I mean, let's be honest. If I came here for lots of folks in Cuyahoga County who work hard every day for this county, and I said to you, okay, here's the number one thing. Everybody working for Cuyahoga County, here's the number one thing you need to know. You do this, you're golden under the ethics law. No worries, all right? Here's the secret. Don't take trips to Paris. What's your reaction? A lot of you, seriously. Okay. Because, you know, for many of us, that's not our daily reality, right? How many of you actually put yourself into the non-wined and dine category of public servants? Anybody there? Yeah, believe me, I'm right there with you, okay? People send remarkably few presents to the Ohio Ethics Commission. I gotta tell you, it is a lonely place to work at the holiday. We bring in our own cookies. Job well done, everyone, because our vendors forget about us, right? So I will talk more about the gift thing briefly, I grant you, because I know it can happen. People want to know what can we bring, what can't we take, et cetera, from our vendors, et cetera. But I also didn't want you to forget about what I like to call those intangible things of value as well. This is something that you couldn't put in a gift bag and say, happy birthday, but it's still valuable. Like in the hypothetical I used, if I had signed off on my dad's application request to receive medical care from that state facility, is that something of value? And even if I'm not the one benefiting, can't put it in a gift bag and it doesn't go to me, it's not doing me any good, what the law says is we cannot use our authority, our influence, to secure something of value, even if you can't touch it or see it or feel it. I was speaking, a similar speech to this one, where I was speaking to county employees in a different part of Ohio from many different offices represented. And there was a gentleman that came up to me after my speech, and he said, you know, Susan, I'm an inspector for the county health department, and I inspect restaurants as one of my duties, part of my job. And he said, you know that gift thing you talked about? That is just not an issue for me. I know some things might be pretty minor. If some restaurant owner, I'm inspecting the restaurant, they gave me a piece of pie and a cup of coffee, I know that's pretty minor. I'm probably not going to go to jail for that, but I just choose not to do it. And I said, that's fine. You can err on the side of being more ethical and more cautious if you want to be, no worries. And he said, however, after hearing you speak today, I am thinking I need to go a step beyond what I've been doing. I said, okay, tell me more. And he said, well, my parents own 2 restaurants here in the county where I work. And after hearing you speak today, I'm thinking maybe I shouldn't be the one inspecting their restaurants anymore. You think? Now, obviously this has come a little late in his career. It seems to have been occurring all along. But to be fair to him, should we assume that this guy who was obviously already engaged in inspecting his parents' restaurants, should we assume that every time he inspected that restaurant, that he clearly falsified those documents? He obviously skewed the outcome in favor of his parents. Do we have to assume that? No. You know what the truth is? If you were to say to me, you know, Susan, those hypotheticals you're giving, I think I could be objective. You know what? I'm willing to believe you. You know you better than I know you. But you remember when I used that phrase that the ethics law is a uniform standard of conduct? The law wasn't written to say, you know, you look like a straight up guy. I have a good feeling about you. I just get a good vibe about your character. You know, go ahead and inspect your parents' restaurant. I just trust you. I just get a good vibe from you. You, on the other hand, you just seem a little unsavory to me. I don't get quite that same level of trust. Why don't you go ahead and obey the ethics so we'll all feel better when we eat that restaurant? It wasn't written that way. What the law says is when our public responsibilities, in that case, the authority, right, to approve or not approve that inspection, when that public responsibility somehow comes into some sort of arena with our private lives, in his case, his parents' business, what we're going to do is take those 2 things, our public responsibility and our private lives, and we're going to go like this. We're just going to separate them. You know, and Paul touched on this too, those protections, lots of protections occur when we do this. Public responsibilities, private lives, boom, we're going to separate them and make sure the 2 don't meet at our public jobs. Certainly, you're protected. Obey the ethics law. I don't want you to get in trouble under the law any more than I want to get in trouble under the ethics law. Secondly, the public's protected, right? Don't you feel better knowing that when you eat at that restaurant that whoever said it was a safe place to eat had no interest in the people who own it, no personal financial interest on it either? I feel better knowing that. And thirdly, the protection of the integrity of your office is very important too, because while not always fair perhaps, isn't it accurate that if one person in some public agency or department, etc., makes a poor decision, that pretty soon everybody's integrity in that office is being questioned? Maybe not always a fair assessment, but isn't that what happens? Yeah, so when we obey the ethics law, we're protecting ourselves, we're protecting the public as a whole, and certainly protecting the good work that really is being done at your various offices and jobs. Now, I won't read this list to you, just glance at it. These are just some of many things that we could see as using our position to secure that something of value. It's not just the person who made the final decision. It's not just the person who voted at some council meeting or at some board meeting. It's any of these things. Yeah, I might not have been the person who signed off on this building plan, but if I'm the one who reviewed it, made recommendations, and forwarded on to my boss, I've already engaged in securing something of value. Because again, we often think of those somethings of value as something tangible, like a ticket or a plane trip or something like that, when it could also be a past inspection. It could be approved plans. It could be, here, I signed off on your request for assistance with child support issues, et cetera, et cetera. So whenever something arises at your public job that has one of those definite and direct impacts on yourself, your family, your outside business associates, that's what you're going to say to your boss, I'm stepping out of this one. Okay, now here again are just a few of many examples we've seen over the years of people that should have abstained and did not, and likely could see legal ramifications as a result. All right? Now, again, as Paul said, this is, I grant you, a bit like taking a drink of water from a fire hose to get all this information in a short period of time, excuse me. But I did also promise that I would touch on this issue of what I like to call those tangible things of value, the more traditional gifts, right? Now, certainly, I won't speak to your ordinance for the county. That's going to be discussed after I surrender the podium. But this is going to be a quick overview of what the ethics law talks about when we look at these gifts, these tangible things of value, if you will. 2 things right off the bat here. First of all, everything has value under the ethics law. You know, a piece of paper has value under the ethics law. Don't ever let anybody tell you it doesn't have value. It's too minimal. Everything has value. The question is, can we accept everything offered to us, nothing offered to us, or is it somewhere in between? The second thing that I will tell you is this. The ethics law does not have a specific dollar amount, right? If you look at the statute itself, you will not find a cutoff. Well, as long as you don't go over this amount or that amount or this amount, you're okay. That statute, in this statute, that specific dollar amount doesn't exist. What the ethics law in Ohio talks about is the issue of, does this thing of value, whatever it is that we're talking about, does it have the characteristic to manifest a substantial and an improper influence? Here's your two-part equation under the ethics law. This is my little theorem that I would say, your formula that you want to know. Can I accept this gift? Here it is. Is it substantial, and is it from an improper source? Both halves of this equation must be in place for us to say, yeah, this is illegal under the ethics law. Now, of this two-part equation, the second one, improper, that's the easier one to determine, I grant you. Who's offering you the gift? Is it a current vendor to Cuyahoga County? Is it what I like to call a wannabe vendor? They're soliciting, they're negotiating, they're advertising to you, et cetera. They'd really like to do business with the county. Third, are they someone that's regulated by your office, your agency? They get inspected, they have permits pending before your office, et cetera, et cetera. And remember that last one was someone with a specific interest. The decision your office is going to make is going to impact my property value, my tax value, the child support assistance that I am seeking, et cetera, my building that I want to expand upon at my building. The decision you have to make is going to impact me directly. Any of these folks, associations, businesses are going to be seen as an improper source. It doesn't make them evil. We don't want you to think of the word improper as we're assuming nasty things and they must have ulterior motives. All it means is that company, that person, that vendor would be an improper source of a substantial thing of value. Now, since we don't have a endowment in the Ohio ethics law, how do we know if it's substantial or not? Here's what the Ethics Commission said in its written interpretation law and advisory opinion. They said, if this thing of value, whatever it is that we're talking about, if this thing of value is nominal, and they even use the Latin phrase de minimis, then it's not substantial. And they gave examples. Here are examples of things the commission said are nominal, de minimis, not substantial, not illegal. Frankly, the Ethics Commission just isn't worried about these kind of things. All right, here are some of their examples. Promotional items. You know, you go to a conference for people who do what you do for a living, and you know the vendors are handing out their literature. What are some of the trinkets they're handing out with their company logo on it? That's it, pens. Boy, you guys got the pens in Cuyahoga County, huh? Keychains and the mouse pads and, what's that? Okay, I thought you said tickets at first. I'm like, no, bad vendor, no tickets handing out. Yeah. You know what I've been seeing a lot of? I think the economy is really weighing hard on people's minds. You know what I've been seeing a lot of when I do speeches at conferences around the state? Those stress balls, the globes and the piggy banks. People are stressed out apparently in America today. Yeah, you know what? Those kind of things with their logo on it, nominal, de minimis. The Ethics Commission's not following up on the case of who gave you a pencil. That's just not one of our investigative cases. You know, I was speaking once at the Columbus Convention Center, and I'd finished my speech, I was going to head back to the office, and this guy stops me in the hallway, and he says to me, Susan, before you go back to your office, I thought you might want to know what I just witnessed in the vendor ballroom. And I thought, uh-oh. I said, what? And he said, one of my colleagues from my office, he went up to this one vendor booth, and he picked up not one, but 2 coffee mugs. And then he walked over to this other vendor booth, because they had these great big bins of Hershey Kisses, and he used both of those coffee mugs. And then he looked at me like this. Like clearly I was supposed to march into the ballroom and read the man his Miranda rights for having some coffee mugs with Hershey Kisses. Nominal, de minimis, not what we're discussing in the ethics law. All right, the commission, so those minor kind of token items, promotion items, the commission even said minor gifts, maybe modest food items. If you, just for your own peace of mind, if you want to choose to decline any gift, that's fine. But we just want you to understand, the Ethics Commission is not marching in with SWAT teams for somebody who got a tin of popcorn at the holidays. This is not what we're discussing in the ethics law. When we're talking about these things that are substantial in the eyes of the ethics law, things that we've actually seen legal ramifications for, everything from, the entertainment arena seems to be a prime field for violations, whether, it's golf outings were widely discussed a few years ago. I mentioned Broadway tickets. I'll bet you can't guess what's widely sought after in Columbus, Ohio in the fall, can you? Hockey tickets. Yeah, this year probably so. It sounds like Ohio State's not going to have a team this year, actually, right? So maybe hockey will, yeah. That kind of stuff. The home remodeling, we've seen that, driveways, and you've seen roofs and discounts on things, et cetera, major discounts that someone's being singled out for. These are the kind of things that naturally naturally, A, that the law is going to see as substantial. I mean, that's worth more than the, if you will, one-time meal at Bob Evans kind of thing, a modest food item like that. And naturally also, that's the kind of thing, if someone is getting free season tickets to some professional sporting event or free season tickets to, the Broadway series on the stage, naturally, the public's going to start to say, wait a minute. Are they watching out for me or for themselves? One of my favorite lines actually to come out, I think it was The Plain Dealer. One of my favorite lines in the midst of all this investigation in your county was an editorial, and I believe the line was, corruption in government is what happens when someone goes into public service seeking to do well instead of seeking to do good. That line has really resonated with me. Now, to be fair, is there a certain selfish motivation for those of us in public service? Well, I admit, I love my job. I think I got the best job in the state of Ohio, but I confess I don't just do it out of the goodness of my heart, right? I need a paycheck and health care just like every other American. So yes, there is that certain self-motivation, I grant you. But beyond that, the idea of the ethics law is to say those of us privileged to be in public service are privileged to make sure our jobs benefit other people. I mean, that's something that we can really be proud of, I think. I know something that I'm very proud of as a public servant. So when you're questioning, am I allowed to take this gift? Boss, can I take this? Here's your formula. Substantial and improper. And do you remember Saturday morning Schoolhouse Rock? You remember conjunction junction? Yeah. What's my conjunction, the top line there? And, yes. I did this speech once, and I said to my crowd, I said, you remember conjunction junction? I said, what's my conjunction? And someone yelled, function! I said, that excellent rhyming skills. That's wonderful. But yeah, that word and, I didn't put it in there just to balance out my slide. That word is in the statute. So what that means is, in order for us to say the accepting of this gift, this thing of value, is illegal under the ethics law, we have to see both halves. If we're missing one of these halves, not an issue under the Ohio ethics law, right? So if, in fact, a vendor to your office does drop off the tray of cookies, right? Under the ethics law, and we're talking, modest kind of cookies here, right? We're going to say, okay, yeah, they're a vendor, so they're improper, but a modest tray of cookies, not substantial. Legally, under the ethics law, are you allowed to accept them? Yeah. And the reverse here is true as well. If my best friend who lives in Texas sends to me a cashmere sweater for my birthday, I'm going to call that substantial in the eyes of the ethics law, but my best friend who lives in Texas is not a vendor. She has nothing to do with the ethics commission, so I've got a yes for substantial and a no for improper. Am I allowed to accept that gift? Yeah. It's only when, let's say, that vendor, that person that your office regulates, says to you, hey, I got an extra box ticket to see the Indians play this spring. And don't let the whole not having a good season thing throw you, okay? When someone's taking you a luxury box with, food and beverages, it's substantial in the eyes of the law, okay? It's when that vendor, that person doing business with, that person regulated by your office says that you say, that's substantial, yes. Is it improper? Yes. Do you remember when we were kids and our mom said 2 wrongs don't make a right? Under the ethics law, 2 yeses, yes, it's substantial, yes, it's improper, equals a what? No. 2 yeses equal a no under the law, okay? All right, so again, I know this is a very brief overview. Let me give you one more thing, and then I want to talk about public contracts briefly in the couple of minutes I have left. This is an area of the ethics law. In my tenure at the ethics law, I haven't seen as many cases of this one, but this one, supplemental compensation, kind of self-explanatory, isn't it? No one's allowed to supplement our compensation. No one can augment our salaries. So if you will, let's say Cuyahoga County said, hey, Susan, normally when we have speakers come up and speak, we give them a little check to thank our speakers for coming up. Not a lot, but just our way of saying thanks. If I accepted that, I would be guilty of supplemental compensation because I'm already paid by the state of Ohio to do this work. I'm not allowed to let anyone else supplement my salary, pay me again for doing the same work, if you will. All right? Now, I know this is fast, but let me go through here quickly. We're going to skip all this. I use this PowerPoint for 2 and 3 hour sessions too, but we're going to skip a lot of this. The other area of the ethics law that I did want to talk about is this one, public contracts. This is the only area of the law that we're going to discuss that does contain a felony of the 4th degree. If you look at that first bullet point, you might think to yourself, well, this looks an awful lot like the conflict stuff, right? Because that conflict slide you had up said, I couldn't use my authority, my influence, or I couldn't solicit or accept something of value for myself, my family, my business associates. And you're thinking, why is this one a felony then? If that one's a misdemeanor of the 1st degree, why is this one a felony? Because it looks an awful lot alike to secure a public contract. Here's the thing. In this one, you know, I should say in the first one, in the conflict of interest provision, yeah, I may have used, or I like to say abused, my position to get that past inspection, that license, that, you know, that gift, et cetera, for myself or my family. In this area of the ethics law, I have now used my public position to get public money for myself, my family, one of my outside business associates. In fact, somebody here, give me an example of the type of good or service you would contract. What kind of service agreement would you have? What kind of goods do you contract or services do you contract out for with a private vendor? Someone yell one out to me. Okay, that's not yelling, that was whispering. Copy machines. All right, so let's say you have not been as thrilled with Happy Copy Machine Copying Company that come and prepare your machines. And you want to maybe look at some new companies. You want to do a 2-year contract to have somebody come in and repair and maintain, do maintenance, et cetera. And you think to yourself, well, you know, my brother owns a copy machine repair company. I think he'd do a great job for Cuyahoga County. Is your brother allowed to submit a bid, let's say, to be considered for that contract, even though you work where you work? Yes, as long as what? I'm out of this one. Hey, bro, I wish you all the best, good luck, but I'm not making phone calls on your behalf. I'm not advocating for it. You are on your own, right? Same thing. Let's say you work part-time for a photocopy machine repair company. Can your boss who owns that company submit the bid? Yes. Same thing. You know, I like to say, this is kind of, the lawyers in there might be like cringing the way I use terminology, but I like to think of it as a two-sided recusal here, if you will, because certainly as a county employee, I'm not advocating on behalf of my boss, but even as an employee of this company, I shouldn't be the liaison either with the county I work for, right? Saying, hey, you know, my boss wants to get a contract with the county. Really, there needs to be some stepping away on both ends of that one. And finally, let's say you yourself own a copy machine repair company. Can you submit a bid to Cuyahoga County, stay out of the decision-making process, and get that contract? In general, the law would say no. There is an exception to this area of the law, though I doubt that we would see it applied very often in this part of the state. The part of the law that would say it's possible, that's actually a 4-part provision, but one of the provisions is you couldn't get that supplier, that service somewhere else for a similar or a lower cost. And I have to tell you, if somebody in Cuyahoga County called us up and said, yeah, Susan, the only copy repair company we could find was one owned by a county employee, we're going to say, really? So if I Google copy repair, companies, I'm going to get one hit in all of Cuyahoga County, right? So in general, if you own your own business, I would just ask for you to assume that in general, you're not going to be a vendor to Cuyahoga County. Not just the office or department you work for, but the county as a whole, because the county government really is your employer. And you know, the last thing that I will tell you, I'll talk real quickly about this here. Oh, I skipped it, is this issue. The issue of nepotism falls under public contract provision of the ethics law, a 4th-degree felony, not a 1st-degree felony. There's no death penalty for nepotism, just so you know, yeah. A 4th-degree felony, yes. And you know what, in my mind, I admit that as a layperson here, I find this area, the ethics law, one of the easier ones to understand. We issue advisory opinions at the Ethics Commission. Even though I go out and talk about the ethics all the time, there are times when I go, okay, what? What did I read? I don't get it. I have to read it again. Don't hire your child. Don't hire your spouse. Don't hire your brothers and sisters. Isn't that hard to understand? And yet, it's a fairly commonly violated area of the ethics law, and I have witnessed it to be one of the greatest violators of the public's trust. That when they see someone, you know, let's say I'm elected to public office and I have within 2 months have hired, you know, my 3 adult kids and my 2 brothers and my sister and both my parents. You know, the public's going right back to that quote we said earlier, that the public's going to start saying, they're in this for themselves. They're in it to do well, not to do good. Now, having said that, if your family members want to pursue public employment at this county, at the city, at the state, whatever, marvelous. Public service can be a wonderful place to know that you're doing good, that your job makes a difference. So if your loved one applies for a public job, that's great. Wish them well. I'll be thinking about you, honey. But beyond that, we stay 100% away and out of that. We don't make phone calls on their behalf. We don't lobby for them. We're not having casual conversations with the person who's going to do the interviews or review the resumes. We stay completely out of that and let the process happen completely on its own, so that person is either hired or not hired on their own merit. Now, I know I've run out of time, even though I have talked 49,000 miles per hour, I realize. But I'm gonna surrender the floor, but we'll take questions at the end for any information. And you know, having said that, again, I said my family ties are in Cleveland. And you know, Paul said this too, be proud of where you work. This is a great community. The history of Cleveland, I love living in Columbus, but I envy the history that we are missing that Cleveland has. So be proud of where you work, and don't ever forget when you're heading home from your office at the end of the day that there's somebody in this county whose life is better because you went to work today. Not everybody can say that about their job. So on behalf of the Ohio Ethics Commission and everybody who calls Ohio home, thanks for your commitment to public service.
First of all, my name is Elise Hara. For those of you who have not met me, I am the Director of Human Resources. Thank you very much, Susan and Paul, for a thorough presentation. You have all received a copy of the ethics policy. I'm not so sure I can be quite as dynamic or entertaining as Susan, but I'm here today to highlight areas that are of key importance for the Cuyahoga County ethics policy. I do remind each and every one of you that it is your responsibility to read and familiarize yourselves with all of the provisions. But what I'm doing is I'm highlighting key components of the ethics policy that are specific to Cuyahoga County. Obviously, we'll take questions and answers at the end. And I understand that most of you have not had the opportunity to read it all, so any questions that you may have can be fielded either to myself or the Inspector General. I'd like to first focus on who the training is required for in Cuyahoga County, and the executive touched upon it initially. Who receives it? Obviously, public officials, employees, lobbyists, and contractors, as well as volunteers, agents, and board and commission members. So this isn't just a policy that is limited to those of us who work for the county. It's also all of those who have interactions, whether as a volunteer or a business person. So there are several key definitions that start on page 25, but these are the 6 I want to focus on in my presentation. Anything of value, and the Ohio Ethics Commission touches upon it, but has indicated that they don't put a value on anything of value, monetary value. This ordinance does. And anything of value means anything that has a value greater than $75. The terms benefit, gift, and anything of value are all defined to encompass any possible loophole. Even though there is a $75 limit for gifts, this does not mean that employees can automatically accept gifts or other items of value up to $75. They would still be subject to the Ohio Revised Code provisions and are barred from receiving anything above that amount. What's important is the analysis that was described by Susan for any gift that's under $75 would apply. The reality is that no one should accept anything having a cumulative value greater than $75, and if you have to ask yourself whether you can accept an item, when in doubt, it probably is best to decline. Campaign contributions are defined in this policy as any monetary or non-monetary donation to any political campaign committee. Employees may not contribute to their own elected county employer. So anybody in this room cannot contribute directly to any county elected official under the charter. Conflict of interest has been well defined by the Ohio Ethics Commission today, so I'm not going to go into that too much, but just to remind you that it is not limited to a financial interest. It can be a professional or non-pecuniary interest as well. Today, you should have been given, and I think it was forwarded to you in advance as well, a nepotism form, and I want to explain where that form comes from. I believe the state of Ohio has a very similar form for their employees, but in order to understand who exactly you have to list in that form, it is important to first look at Section 28, which covers employment of relatives and reads as follows. And typically I don't like to read things, but I think for purposes of understanding the employment of relatives under the Cuyahoga County provisions, it's important for me not only to go through that definition, but also go through the definition of full family. Under Section 28, an employee will not participate in the decisions involving a direct benefit to relatives such as employment, retention, appraisal, promotion, salary, and leave of absence. To preclude actual favoritism or the appearance of favoritism in the employment relationship, no employee shall take any part of the selection process for a position for which a full family member, and that is a separately defined term, is inapplicable. In addition, an individual may not be assigned or accept employment in a department in which a supervisory authority or responsibility directly affecting that department is provided by, again, a full family member of the individual. Employees who become related as a result of marriage, their own or that of a relative, will be transferred to another work unit. Relationships to another individual employed by the county will not constitute a bar to initial employment unless the hiring authority for the position is a full family member of the applicant. The county extends equal consideration to all applicants and candidates for employment. Neither positive nor negative weight shall be considered when a full family relationship exists with another county employee. Having seen the previous ethics policy that was in place temporarily, I do know that the full family definition is pretty different from the definition that existed before. A full family encompasses a public official or employee's spouse, domestic partner, child, children, grandchildren, parents, parents-in-laws, grandparents, grandparents-in-laws, sisters, sisters-in-law, brothers, brothers-in-law, sons-in-law, daughters-in-law, nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, or cousins, whether by marriage, lineal descent, or adoption. It's really critical to understand that this doesn't mean that you can't have relatives who work in the county. You simply can't be in a position where your relatives might fall under Section 28, where you are having some kind of influence or impact on their work performance or decisions that affect promotions, hiring, firing, and the such. So before the end of today, or if you still have questions after the presentations, please fill out the nepotism forms by listing members that fit under the full family definition. If after today's session you still have questions, you may direct them to HR for clarification and return the forms no later than this Friday to HR. Also, if some of you did not get to sign your acknowledgement forms, you can submit those to us either at the end of today or by Friday as well. Both the Inspector General and the Human Resource Department will have copies of all of these forms. They will be contained in your personnel files. And again, I have gotten some questions like, well, so-and-so is related to so-and-so. The question I ask is, what is the harm to listing an individual on this list? Really none. So think about that when you look at the definition of full family, but the full family definition is very encompassing. So the public, official, and employee definition is contained in the definitional section. And some of the questions that I think are important, because it's a much broader definition than all of us who work for the county, is, does it matter if I receive compensation? Does it make a difference if I'm working full-time or part-time? Does it make a difference if I'm only a temporary worker? Does this ethics ordinance apply to me? And the question, or the answer is, absolutely. Volunteers will get trained on this. They don't receive compensation. People with temporary assignments will be duty-bound to read the ethics policy and go through the training as well. Very quick scenarios that have crossed my desk, whether investigated or not. These are things that have historically, in my time as government, and I worked for the government many years ago before, these are questions that come up. There should not be any use of, any personal use of a county vehicle. And sometimes there's a lot of, that can be a difficult question because depending on what vehicle you're assigned to for what purposes, You may have permission to drive it from home or to home, and those are things that you need to discuss with your supervisor and make sure that they're in compliance with the ethics ordinance. No false use of sick time. I think sometimes not specifically to the county, but employees tend to think that sick time, vacation time, it's all a blur. I can use it. I have it. I earned it. It's mine. The reality is sick time truly is for a sick child or yourself, and it needs to be used for that purpose. No personal use of office supplies, copying machines, mailings, and emails. Again, I think one of the most important things that Susan brought to our attention is that we do hold the public's trust. And it's very easy for us to think, well, it's just an email, or I'll send an email to my mom, or I have to remind her to pick up the kids at such and such time. We are not using our own personal computers, and there are different expectations because we are in the public, so do not use your email for personal chats, and be aware that all of your emails and all of your records belong to the county and are subject to public records. No personal use of office supplies, copying machines, mailings, or emails. It might be really easy to copy a chapter out of my kid's book for homework, and who's it going to hurt, right? It's just a couple pages. It's 3 cents a page. Can't do it in the county. Can't do it as a public official. And certainly distribution of political campaign materials is considered personal, so if one were to use a Xerox machine to copy political materials, that would also clearly be in violation of the ethics policy. Abuse of official position. What is misuse of official position? Again, just some samples. Don't ask your secretary to type up your child's book report during office hours, 8:30 to 4:30. Not a good use and not a legal use of her time. Don't have your staff work on the PTA fundraiser. Not appropriate. If you are going to hire someone's services, and I'll get to secondary employment in a bit, do it off county time and compensate them for their services rendered fairly. However, a caveat to supervisors. If the supervisors are going to ask their staff to do secondary duties outside of the workplace, ask yourselves, does your staff that reports to you really feel that they can turn you down? Because if not, then it's really an abuse of your own authority to ask them to do that if they don't feel that they can say, you know what, I don't really want to do that typing project for you off the clock after work. Don't spend county money on a seminar and then decide not to show. I have actually had that one. And then decide to use sick time to cover the time that you didn't. If you miss a seminar and the county has paid for it, you must reimburse the county for that expense. Can I hire my relatives or influence the hiring process? Obviously, no, with the Ohio Revised Code, and that is very much mirrored and strengthened in the Cuyahoga policy. So let's talk a little bit about secondary employment. This is actually on page 37, and just a little note, for those of you who have secondary employment and are just being governed by this new ethics policy, have no fear that there is a carve-out provision that says you have, I believe, 60 days to report any secondary employment. What this section 25 says is, no public official or employee of the county shall engage in secondary employment if that employment is incompatible with the proper discharge of official county duties or might impair objectivity or independent judgment on the job. This includes elective or appointed office in another jurisdiction or in a political party. So, what do you need to do if you do have secondary employment currently or are considering secondary employment in the future? The policy clearly says you have to report it to Human Resources, best to do it in a written format, simple letter that says, here's where I work, this is what I do, and also inform or copy the Inspector General. The Inspector General will investigate those that seem tenuous or where a conflict might appear. If you are working selling products, beauty products, Avon, Arbonne, probably not going to be a conflict that the Inspector General is going to spend a lot of time at. But if you are a social worker and you have an outside business that has a contract potentially with a county, that is something that would require the Inspector General to analyze and make a determination. And Section C states, in situations predating the adoption of this ordinance, the covered person shall seek official advice from the Inspector General within 60 days of the effective date of this code. So there is time to report those, and I'm assuming most secondary employment will not be a conflict with county business, but you don't want to make those assumptions without having them properly investigated. When in doubt, the inquiries should be directed to the Inspector General. Cuyahoga County is in a unique position to be the first county in Ohio with an Inspector General. Her neutral position serves to ensure unbiased decisions on these types of ethical issues. So rendering those opinions is actually even better than one coming from the Human Resources Department, because we do the employment for the county. This is really a secondary issue. If the secondary employment is unrelated to county business, then no conflict should arise. Nevertheless, disclosure still needs to take place. So who has jurisdiction? And what I mean by jurisdiction is who actually enforces and reviews and governs our Cuyahoga County policy. The Inspector General is listed as having investigatory authority. Human Resources Commission is mandated to ensure the training like today takes place, and they can delegate that to the Department of Human Resources. And in some cases, while the Internal Audit Department is still not in place, the internal audit process may reveal ethical issues that will then need to be vetted and investigated by the Inspector General. So these are three entities that make sure that the policy is properly followed. Reporting options. This is very important for Cuyahoga County to know. Where do you go if you do want to report something? The Department of Human Resources, the Inspector General, any supervisor. Sometimes you may feel like you want to report on your supervisor, but that's not really going to make sense. So go to another supervisor, either in a different department or a different director also, because the supervisors and directors all have a responsibility to follow through and an obligation to do so. You can certainly contact the Ohio Ethics Commission, and the county executive's website, onecuyahoga.com, also not only allows employees to avail themselves of being able to report, but also the public. The IG is permitted to take any action which is otherwise lawfully permitted to take, and I'm going to talk about those in a moment, but I'd like to just briefly touch upon whistleblower and what that term means. Whistleblower, if a public official or employee becomes aware in the course of employment of a violation, they may file a written report with County Inspector General or contact the whistleblower hotline, which we are in the process of establishing, or report to any of the individuals that were listed in the previous slide. What is important here is to understand that as a whistleblower, you have legal protections. So you're not going to lose your job, or no one should be submitted to retaliation because as a whistleblower, you reported something that is ethically required to be reported in the ordinance. The body of individuals that would enforce those protections is the Human Resource Commission. They hear all the appeals on the ethics ordinance. Penalties. These are all penalties that would be recommended by the Inspector General. The Inspector General can issue a written notification, admonition, and censure. She can also send a notice to the Ohio Ethics Commission. She can order additional ethics training, which if it was Susan, you probably want to go to, but if it's mine, maybe not. Referral to external enforcement agencies, and this is very key. The Inspector General, first of all, has experience as a federal prosecutor and will recognize criminal or quasi-criminal acts. She will then delegate that investigation to state, federal, and local law agencies. She can also make recommendations to the executive, which could include suspension, loss of contract or future opportunities for vendors, and certainly termination. So in conclusion, the purpose behind the creation of a county-specific ordinance was to reestablish the trust between the public and its government. So with the Inspector General's investigatory powers, the Human Resource Commission's authority to mandate training, and the cumulative effect of educating all parties governed by this policy, the administration's goal of reestablishing trust will be achieved, and I have to thank Councilman Greenspan for my chart. If anybody has any questions, please stay. If not, this concludes the mandatory portion of the training. Myself and the individuals, representatives from the Ohio Ethics Commission will take questions.